And we have a Fox News alert. ISIS has been claiming responsibility for that massacre at the Istanbul nightclub on New Year's Eve. As you know, a gunman still on the run at this hour. Well, he killed 39 people and wounded at least 70 others. The attack ending a very violent year in Turkey that has seen a string of violent terrorist attacks by radical Islamic terrorists. Joining us now is Walid Phares, Fox News Middle East terror analyst, author of Future Jihad, and the former policy advisor to President-elect Trump's campaign. Walid, are these attacks from Istanbul airport to the bombings, to the assassination of the Russian ambassador? I asked a guest earlier if it's really a tragic blowback for Istanbul sadly turning a blind eye for all those years to the radical Islamic ideology, letting all those militants and extremists just flood over the border to Syria as a gateway to embolden ISIS itself.
Eric, in a sense, yes, but let's look into the detail. Of course, when ISIS claimed this operation, they're talking about this is against the infidels, against the apostates, and all of the narrative that is jihadi. But they don't conduct an operation only on the ground of the jihadi narrative. They are sending a strong message to Turkey to let go of its own ambition inside Syria over their own territory. It's more of a geopolitical situation. ISIS has profited, of course, of the support that came to Islamist militias. But even within the Islamist militias, you have those who are friendly to Turkey, those who have accepted the ceasefire with the Assad regime, and those like ISIS who wants to have their own regime. They're not interested in being controlled by any other faction. Therefore, they are striking inside Turkey to send a message. Stay away from us, is their message.
So you see this as really a specific reaction and perhaps retaliation by ISIS, if indeed that claim of responsibility is true, to the UN resolution that Syria and that Turkey has worked with Russia in Syria?
If indeed it's ISIS, most likely it looks like it is, but we have to be very careful here. If indeed it is, then yes. What Turkey and Russia have agreed on is that their allies in Syria will have to go into a ceasefire. But that means that there is a third party in Syria which is not covered by the ceasefire, and that's ISIS. It's as if Russia and Turkey said, we're not going to touch each other's forces, but what we're going to do is both of us work against ISIS. So ISIS is saying, all right, I'm going to deter you. I'm going to strike into the heart of your economy, because tourism is one of the main components of Turkish economy.
Well, can ISIS also strike at Moscow and at Russia for what it's been doing?
Well, there was the assassination of an ambassador. And of course, the Russians are very clear as to the threat of ISIS is not just in Syria or Iraq for them. It could go all the way to Chechnya, to Dagestan, to other places, and we've seen examples in the past.
And how does this fit in what the president-elect wants to do in terms of going after ISIS specifically, and what it means in terms of Syria and Assad's? Basically, they won. I mean, Assad won, you know, Russia won, and you know what that means. That also means that Tehran has won. With the ceasefire after this tragic, unbelievable humanitarian catastrophe.
Yes, Eric, you know, and we discussed it before, the options in Syria and in Iraq, mostly in Syria, are not that easy. On the one hand, you have the Islamists and the jihadists, a whole jungle of those. On the other hand, you have the other jihadists, which are Hezbollah and pro-Iranian militias and what have you. Either one wins, and the international community, civil societies, and the United States are losing. So now we are still under the current policy of the administration, which is basically we have been excluded from these negotiations, discussions that became a resolution between Russia, Iran, Syria, and Turkey on the one hand. We are out. Now we're going to wait for the next administration to come to assess the situation. One consensus I can see at least between us, the Turks, and the Russians is to get rid of ISIS. But then you have the major question, what would replace ISIS? Would it be these fellows or the others? And that's a tough call.
Well, I mean, what do you expect? Here's what the Wall Street Journal says in a startling editorial, basically, saying the peace of vultures in Syria. Russia, it says, also enhances its growing status as a Middle East power, further pushing America to the sidelines. Mr. Obama's foreign policy of American retreat has left the world's authoritarians advancing more aggressively than at any time since the 1970s. The tragic lesson of Syria is that when the eagle flies away, the vultures move in. Well, the vultures have won, so how does this change under President Trump?
That's right. That's a very good description. The eagle is out, but a bigger eagle is going to come in. Now the choices are where we're going to fly, who are our allies, and of course there are some limitations. People can win. I mean, now Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, and Assad are winning the game, but they have limitations. How long can Assad sustain the occupation, not the occupation, the domination of 5 large Sunni cities? How long can Russia sustain having its forces in Syria being bled without an agreement? So the Russians too, though they are gaining, they would like to see a solution. But that solution for everybody goes through the dismantlement of ISIS first and then moving in with moderate forces. Otherwise, we will be repeating the war again.
And the Russians and Iranians have been suffering losses in Syria that they don't really talk about. So you're right, Walid. We'll see how long that can last. Walid Phares, good to see you and Happy New Year. Hope this year is a better one than what we've seen in the past, of course.
We hope. Thank you.